The small velvet box felt heavy in her hand, heavier than it should have been for something so delicate. It was their 5th anniversary, and Julian, her husband of 5 years, stood before her with that familiar, almost predatory glint in his eyes. "For my perfect wife," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that once thrilled her, now sent a shiver down her spine. Inside, nestled on black satin, were 2 exquisite sapphire pendants, each a deep, mesmerizing blue, framed in white gold. They were beautiful, undeniably so, but as he fastened the delicate chain around her neck, the weight of the central sapphire, a flawless salon sapphire the size of her thumbnail, felt unnatural. A cold, dense pressure against her skin that seemed to hum with a silent, unseen energy. Eleanor smiled, a practiced curve of her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "They're stunning, Julian. Thank you." He kissed her forehead, a perfunctory gesture, and then turned to retrieve his Italian leather briefcase. "I have an early flight. Don't wait up." As the door to their penthouse suite clicked shut, the smile vanished. She walked to the full-length mirror, the sapphire glinting under the soft light. It wasn't just the weight, it was the subtle, almost imperceptible vibration she felt, like a tiny, dormant pulse. Her instincts, honed over years as a corporate litigator, screamed that something was wrong. Very wrong. Julian was a man who built empires, and in doing so, often dismantled lives. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly charming when he chose to be. Their marriage had begun with a whirlwind romance, a dazzling ascent into a world of private jets and exclusive galas. But beneath the glittering surface, Eleanor had slowly realized she was living in a gilded cage. Her career, once a source of immense pride, had been gently, then firmly, discouraged. Her social circle had narrowed to Julian's associates. Her finances, once independent, were now managed by his team for optimal tax efficiency. Each step, each concession, had been presented as an act of love, a way to simplify her life, to protect her. But she was no longer protected. She was trapped. That night, alone in their silent apartment, Eleanor carefully removed the sapphire pendant. The faint vibration was still there. She had a contact, a former colleague from her legal days, a tech wizard named Leo, who now specialized in digital forensics. He was discreet, expensive, and owed her a favor from a particularly nasty intellectual property case years ago. She sent him a cryptic message: urgent, delicate, need a favor, no questions asked. His reply was immediate: name the time and place. The next morning, under the guise of a spa appointment, Eleanor met Leo in a nondescript cafe. The air inside was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the low hum of hushed conversations, a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of her penthouse. Leo, a man whose perpetually rumpled appearance belied his razor-sharp mind, sat hunched over a small table, nursing a lukewarm espresso. He wore a faded band t-shirt and jeans, looking utterly out of place amidst the cafe's faux bohemian decor. He barely glanced up as she approached, his eyes already fixed on the small velvet box she placed on the table. He examined the pendant with a jeweler's loupe, his brow furrowed in concentration, the sapphire catching the dim cafe light. Then, he pulled out a series of specialized devices from a padded, nondescript case that looked like it belonged to a traveling salesman. A spectrum analyzer, a miniature RF detector, a thermal imager, tools Eleanor barely recognized, but knew were formidable. His fingers, surprisingly nimble, worked with a practiced efficiency. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the clinking of ceramic cups and the distant rumble of city traffic. His face, usually impassive, slowly shifted from curiosity to a grim realization. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He leaned back, pushing his unruly dark hair from his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, his voice barely a whisper, the words heavy with a chilling implication. "This isn't just a sapphire. It's a custom-fabricated biometric tracker and a live audio transmitter. Military grade. It's monitoring your pulse, your movements, and every word you say." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The clatter of a dropped spoon from a nearby table seemed deafening. The warmth of the coffee in her hands felt suddenly alien. Julian wasn't just controlling her, he was surveilling her. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, a sickening lurch in her stomach. The perfect husband, the generous giver, was a warden, his love a sophisticated form of imprisonment. The thought was so grotesque, so utterly dehumanizing, that for a moment she felt a wave of nausea. But then, a flicker of something else ignited within her, a cold, hard resolve. The initial shock gave way to a simmering rage, a quiet fury that solidified her purpose. She wouldn't just break free, she would dismantle his cage, piece by piece. She would make him regret ever underestimating her. Instead of confronting Julian, Eleanor decided to play his game. She would use his own weapon against him. She had to think carefully, strategically, like the litigator she once was, dissecting a complex case. Julian's empire, Sterling Holdings, was built on a foundation of complex financial maneuvers, often skirting the edge of legality. Eleanor knew enough from her brief time in his inner circle to understand the vulnerabilities. His Achilles heel was his offshore network, a labyrinth of shell corporations and trusts designed to obscure his true wealth and avoid taxes. It was a tangled web, but she had always been good at untangling. Her father, Robert Vance, had been a titan in corporate law, a man of unwavering integrity. He had instilled in her a fierce sense of justice, a belief that the law, when wielded correctly, could be a force for good. 3 years ago, he'd suffered a debilitating stroke, leaving him a shadow of his former self, confined to a long-term care facility. His firm, Vance & Associates, had been vulnerable, and Julian, with his charming assurances, had helped Eleanor manage its transition, ostensibly to protect her father's legacy. He'd spoken of preserving its reputation, of safeguarding its clients. In reality, he'd systematically absorbed its most valuable assets into Sterling Holdings, leaving her with a shell, a hollowed-out husk of what was once a formidable legal institution. Eleanor had been too grief-stricken and too trusting to see the predatory nature of his help, too caught in the whirlwind of her own sorrow to recognize the subtle, insidious theft. The memory of her father's proud, strong hands, now frail and still, fueled her determination. But her father, even in his illness, had left her a hidden weapon. Before his stroke, he'd quietly established a substantial trust in Eleanor's name, structured to be impervious to marital claims or corporate takeover. It was her secret nest egg, one Julian had never discovered, a testament to his foresight and his quiet protection of her. Now, it was time to activate it. The thought of Julian's face, when he realized the extent of her independent resources, brought a grim satisfaction. Eleanor spent the next few weeks moving with a calculated slowness, acting the part of the devoted, oblivious wife. She wore the sapphire pendant constantly, letting Julian believe his surveillance was yielding nothing but the mundane details of her life. Her yoga classes, her charity luncheons, her visits to her father. She even made sure to have seemingly innocuous phone conversations within earshot of the pendant, discussing recipes or trivial social engagements, painting a picture of domestic contentment. Meanwhile, in secret, she began to build her counter-strategy. Leo became her silent partner, a ghost in the machine, helping her establish secure channels of communication and a digital ghost presence that left no trace. He set up encrypted messaging apps, burner phones, and a network of virtual private servers that would make her digital footprint untraceable. Eleanor started quietly liquidating assets within her father's trust, converting them into untraceable digital currency, then channeling them into a new, independent holding company she'd formed under a discreet alias, a name Julian would never connect to her. The process was painstaking, requiring meticulous attention to detail, but she relished the challenge. Each step felt like a small victory, a brick removed from her gilded cage. Her first move was to target Sterling Holdings' most vulnerable point, a massive, highly leveraged acquisition Julian was orchestrating in Southeast Asia. The deal was complex, involving significant offshore capital and a web of shell companies, all designed to obscure the true beneficiaries and minimize tax liabilities. If she could disrupt that, she could hit him where it hurt most, not just financially, but in his carefully cultivated image of invincibility. Eleanor needed an insider. Julian's executive assistant, a sharp, ambitious young woman named Chloe, was her target. She was privy to many of Julian's confidential dealings, often working late into the night, her face etched with a weariness that spoke of more than just long hours. Eleanor had observed her growing disillusionment with his ruthless tactics, the way she flinched at his sharp words, the subtle slump of her shoulders when she carried out a particularly ethically dubious instruction. She was also fiercely loyal to her ailing mother, whose medical bills were mounting, a fact Eleanor had gleaned from a casual conversation with one of Julian's other assistants. This was her vulnerability, her Achilles heel. Eleanor arranged a chance encounter with Chloe at a charity gala, a glittering affair Julian insisted she attend. She approached her with a practiced air of concern, feigning genuine interest in her mother's health. "Chloe, darling, how is your mother doing? I heard she's been unwell," Eleanor murmured, her voice soft and empathetic, a stark contrast to Julian's usual brusqueness. Her eyes, usually guarded, softened slightly. Eleanor subtly offered a solution, a discreet, anonymous donation to cover the medical expenses, no strings attached, from a philanthropic trust she managed. She made it clear it was entirely confidential, a gesture of goodwill, nothing more. Chloe's gratitude was palpable, a flicker of hope in her tired eyes. A week later, a secure, encrypted message landed in Chloe's inbox, detailing the true nature of Julian's Southeast Asian deal, complete with evidence of potential fraud and money laundering. Eleanor didn't ask her to betray him, she simply gave her the truth and the means to protect herself. Knowing Chloe's conscience, coupled with her mother's well-being, would do the rest. Chloe, armed with the information, anonymously tipped off a financial journalist known for his investigative prowess, a tenacious reporter named David Miller, who had a reputation for fearlessly pursuing corporate malfeasance. The article, when it broke, was devastating. It wasn't just a dry financial report. It was a scathing exposé, detailing the dubious financial structures, the potential for market manipulation, and the ethical breaches at the heart of Julian's acquisition. The headline screamed of shadowy deals and offshore shenanigans. Sterling Holdings stock plummeted, shedding billions in market value overnight. The deal collapsed, leaving Julian's carefully constructed house of cards teetering. He was furious, tearing through his office, his voice echoing through the penthouse, convinced he had a leak, but unable to pinpoint it. He suspected everyone, his CFO, his legal team, even his most trusted advisors, but never Eleanor, his perfect wife, with the sapphire pendant, seemingly oblivious to the financial storm brewing around her. She watched him from a distance, a ghost in his own home, a silent observer of his unraveling. The next phase was more personal, more deeply rooted in Eleanor's own history. She needed to reclaim her father's firm, Vance & Associates, which Julian had stripped for parts, leaving behind a husk. The key was a series of complex intercompany loans Julian had orchestrated, transferring Vance & Associates' most valuable clients and intellectual property to a Sterling Holdings subsidiary. The paperwork was a masterpiece of legal obfuscation, designed to make the transfers appear legitimate, a labyrinth of clauses and subclauses. But Eleanor knew Julian's methods. She knew where to look for the cracks, the small, almost invisible flaws in his meticulously crafted deception. Eleanor spent countless nights poring over old files, digital records she'd secretly retrieved from her father's archived server, and the few remaining documents from Vance & Associates that Julian hadn't managed to spirit away. The scent of old paper and dust filled her makeshift study, a small, unused room in the penthouse that Julian rarely entered. Her eyes burned from staring at screens, her fingers ached from sifting through boxes. She found it, a single, overlooked clause in a subsidiary agreement, a technicality that rendered the transfer of intellectual property invalid if the original firm's founding partners had not been properly notified. Her father, in his meticulous way, had insisted on this clause years ago, a safeguard against corporate raiding, a quiet testament to his foresight. Julian, in his arrogance, his belief in his own infallibility, had overlooked it. It was a tiny thread, but it was enough to unravel the entire tapestry. With Leo's help, Eleanor secured the services of a brilliant, albeit notoriously expensive, corporate lawyer named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a shark, known for his aggressive tactics and his ability to exploit legal loopholes. He loved a challenge, especially against a titan like Julian, and the prospect of taking down Sterling Holdings clearly invigorated him. Eleanor met him in his opulent, minimalist office overlooking the city, the air crisp with the scent of expensive leather and ambition. She presented him with her evidence, a meticulously compiled case demonstrating Julian's predatory acquisition of Vance & Associates, complete with timelines, financial statements, and the crucial overlooked clause. Marcus's eyes gleamed, a predatory glint mirroring Julian's own, but in service of justice. "This isn't just about reclaiming a firm, Eleanor," he said, leaning forward, his voice a low, confident growl. "This is about exposing a pattern of corporate malfeasance. Julian Henderson is about to learn what it means to face a real fight, and I, for one, am looking forward to teaching him." They filed a lawsuit, a civil action demanding the return of Vance & Associates' assets and intellectual property, citing breach of fiduciary duty and corporate fraud. The legal battle was brutal, a war waged on paper and in courtrooms. Julian, predictably, unleashed his army of lawyers, a phalanx of sharp-suited litigators from the city's most prestigious firms, attempting to bury them in motions and countermotions, to drown them in legal jargon and procedural delays. But Marcus was relentless. He systematically dismantled Julian's arguments, exposing the shell game, the dubious loans, and the deliberate obfuscation with a precision that was both terrifying and exhilarating to watch. He had a knack for cutting through the noise, for finding the simple truth buried beneath layers of corporate deception. During the discovery phase, a crucial piece of evidence emerged, thanks to a carefully worded subpoena Marcus had crafted. It was an old email chain between Julian and his chief financial officer, discussing how to restructure Vance & Associates to maximize value for Sterling Holdings. The language, though veiled, clearly indicated an intent to strip the firm, not to preserve it. Julian had written, "We need to ensure Vance & Associates is fully integrated, its resources redirected to serve Sterling's strategic objectives. Eleanor's father's legacy, while sentimental, must not impede our progress." The email was a smoking gun, a direct admission of his predatory intent. It was the final nail in the coffin of his plausible deniability. The pressure on Julian mounted. The Southeast Asian deal had already cost him millions, and now this lawsuit threatened to unravel his carefully constructed image as a legitimate businessman, a pillar of the corporate community. His investors were getting nervous, their calls to his office becoming more frequent, more insistent. His board was questioning his judgment, their once unwavering loyalty beginning to fray. The whispers in the city's financial circles grew louder, painting him as a reckless, unethical operator. One evening, Eleanor was in her father's hospital room, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and the soft beeping of medical machinery. She was reading to him from his favorite legal texts, a worn copy of Blackstone's commentaries, his hand resting lightly in hers, when her phone rang. The caller ID flashed Julian's name. Her heart gave a small, involuntary lurch, but she steeled herself. His voice, usually so controlled, so smooth, was laced with a raw edge of desperation, a hint of panic she'd never heard before. "Eleanor," he began, his tone a forced calm that barely masked his agitation. "We need to talk. This lawsuit, it's getting out of hand. It's damaging to both of us." "Is it, Julian?" Eleanor replied, her voice calm, almost detached, a stark contrast to the turmoil she knew he was experiencing. "Or is it just damaging to you?" She could hear him take a sharp, ragged breath on the other end of the line. He paused, then continued, his voice dropping to a more conciliatory, almost pleading tone. "Look, I'm willing to settle. We can negotiate a fair price for Vance & Associates. A generous one, even. Think of your father's legacy, Eleanor. Don't let this public spectacle tarnish it further." "Vance & Associates isn't for sale, Julian," Eleanor said, her grip tightening on her father's hand. "It's coming home. And my father's legacy is about integrity, something you wouldn't understand. Don't be foolish, Eleanor. You can't win this. I have unlimited resources. I can drag this out for years. You'll be financially ruined." His voice was rising now, the veneer of calm cracking. "And I have the truth," Eleanor countered, her voice unwavering. "And a very good lawyer." The conversation ended with a frustrated sigh from Julian, followed by the click of the line disconnecting. He was cornered, and he knew it. The next morning, Marcus received a settlement offer. It was surprisingly generous, offering to return Vance & Associates' core assets, intellectual property, and even a substantial sum in damages. But it came with a non-disclosure agreement, a clause demanding Eleanor never speak of Julian's actions, that she remain silent about the truth of his corporate malfeasance. Eleanor refused. "He stole everything, even my father's name," she told Marcus, her voice firm. "I won't be silenced. Not now, not ever." Marcus, surprisingly, agreed. A slow smile spread across his face. "Good, because I think we can do better, much better." He had a plan, a bold, audacious move that would not only secure justice, but also expose Julian's pattern of behavior to the world. The plan involved a public hearing, a rare move in corporate disputes, but one Marcus believed was necessary to expose Julian's pattern of behavior. He argued that Julian's actions constituted a systemic threat to ethical business practices, and that a public airing of the facts was in the public interest, a matter of corporate accountability. The judge, intrigued by the sheer audacity of the argument and the compelling evidence Marcus presented, agreed to an open hearing. The legal community buzzed with anticipation. The courtroom was packed. Journalists jostled for position, their cameras flashing. Investors, both nervous and curious, filled the gallery. Legal professionals, drawn by the high-profile nature of the case, lined the back rows. All gathered to witness the spectacle, the public unraveling of a corporate titan. Julian, usually impeccably composed, his suits always perfectly tailored, looked visibly strained. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed, and he fidgeted with his tie, a nervous habit Eleanor had never seen in him before. He sat across from her, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and disbelief, a silent accusation. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price, not just in money, but in public humiliation. Marcus presented their case with surgical precision, his voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. He laid out the evidence of Julian's systematic dismantling of Vance & Associates, the fraudulent transfers, the damning email chain. He even called Chloe to testify, her anonymous tip, now a public accusation. She walked to the stand with quiet dignity, her gaze steady, despite the obvious tension in the room. She spoke with a clear, unwavering voice, detailing the pressure Julian exerted, the ethical compromises she was forced to make, and the fear that had driven her to expose him. Her testimony was damning, painting a picture of a ruthless, manipulative boss who demanded absolute loyalty, even at the cost of integrity. Then, Marcus played the recording, not of Julian's conversations with Eleanor, but of his private calls with his chief financial officer, captured by a hidden microphone in his office, a device Leo had discreetly installed months ago, a silent counter-surveillance operation. The recordings revealed Julian openly discussing how to bleed Vance & Associates dry, how to make Eleanor's father disappear from the corporate memory, how to bury the firm under a mountain of paperwork. The courtroom gasped, a collective intake of breath. Julian's face went ashen, his jaw slack. He had been so confident in his surveillance, so blind to the possibility of being surveilled himself. The irony was exquisite. Eleanor had used his own weapon against him, turning his paranoia into his downfall. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Julian was found liable for corporate fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and predatory business practices. Vance & Associates was to be fully restored to Eleanor's control, along with significant punitive damages, a sum that would make a substantial dent in Julian's remaining fortune. More importantly, the judge ordered a full investigation into Sterling Holdings' offshore activities, a move that would undoubtedly lead to further legal troubles for Julian, potentially even criminal charges. The gavel struck, a final, resounding blow. Julian appealed, of course, his legal team scrambling to salvage what they could. But the evidence was overwhelming, the public testimony irrefutable. The public humiliation, the financial losses, and the looming federal investigation crippled his empire. Sterling Holdings began to unravel, its foundations eroded by scandal and legal woes. Investors pulled out in droves. The board, facing mounting pressure, forced his resignation. He lost everything he had built, brick by ruthless brick, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. 2 months later, Eleanor stood in the newly renovated offices of Vance and Associates, the firm's original brass plaque gleaming on the wall, polished to a brilliant shine. The scent of fresh paint and new beginnings filled the air. The old clients were returning, their trust in the firm restored, new ones were signing on, drawn by the story of its reclamation, a testament to resilience and justice. She was no longer Julian's perfect wife, a gilded ornament in his opulent cage. She was Eleanor Vance, a corporate litigator, a protector of legacies, and a woman who had fought her way out of a gilded cage and emerged stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever. Eleanor visited her father that afternoon. He was still unresponsive, his body frail, but she felt his presence, his quiet strength, a comforting anchor in her life. She leaned close and whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "Dad, we did it. Vance and Associates is back. And Julian Henderson, he's facing justice. Your legacy is safe." A faint smile, almost imperceptible, touched his lips, a fleeting shadow of his former self. Or perhaps it was just the way the afternoon light caught his face. But in that moment, Eleanor knew he understood. She knew he was proud. Reclaiming her father's legacy wasn't about revenge. Not truly. It was about justice. It was about restoring what had been stolen, not just from her, but from her family's name, from the very principles her father had lived by. Julian's surveillance, his attempt to control her, had ironically given her the very tools she needed to dismantle his world. The sapphire pendant, once a symbol of her entrapment, now lay in a locked drawer in her office, a silent reminder of the battle she had won, a cold, beautiful trophy of her hard-won freedom. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.